All right, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell. I am back from the rather extended vacation I gave myself on account of the Secret Space Program conference in Bastrop, Texas this last weekend. I was getting ready for that conference as far back as 2 weeks ahead of it. So I was very busy. That's the reason there's been no news and views for the past 2 weeks. In fact, last week I was actually out of town. There was no way for me to do it. But rest assured, the Nefarium has been busy, as you know. And I suppose the big story out there right now is the story of the crash and probable bombing of the Russian metrojet liner that was flying from the Sinai Peninsula, from an Egyptian resort town from the Sinai Peninsula up to St. Petersburg in Russia, killing several people. And there's some peculiarities about this. This story began to break right as I was on my way back home from the conference, and I decided that in order to kind of highlight some of these peculiarities and the questions it's raising for me, I would go right to the RT article and coverage. And sure enough, that they are covering it rather heavily. And there's some interesting statements, pardon me, in the RT article, which I'm going to be linking to you. The headline of the article is UK government, significant possibility bomb may have downed Russian passenger jet over the Sinai. This is dateline the 4th of November. That's yesterday, and it was edited again today as we're doing this report. So this is the very latest from RT. Now, why am I focusing on RT? Well, obviously, it's a Russian airliner, but the second reason is depending on the ability of the Russians to put their investigation teams, their intelligence teams on the ground in that area, this is going to be a narrative that's very interesting to watch because you're going to see both the West, we've seen the British and the Egyptians coming out with statements. The Russians have been rather more reluctant to do so. This is a narrative ultimately that's going to be in the control of Russia. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they will handle this. And in fact, I would suspect they're going to spin it, although not in a blatantly obvious way. All right, now, let me read a couple of things in the Russian RT article. Here's the first statements. I'm reading from paragraphs toward the end, and I want you to understand what I'm doing. I'm jumping around here very deliberately, and I'll tell you why in a moment. I'm reading a few paragraphs here, then skipping a few and reading toward the end, and then coming back and reading in the middle. All right? So here we go. Quote, U.S. intelligence has suggested a bomb planted on the Russian passenger plane by Islamic State or an affiliate group is most likely behind the Metrojet flight crash. And this was reported by CNN on Wednesday, citing a U.S. official familiar with the matter. The U.S. intelligence community has not reached a formal conclusion, the source added, but said that there is a definite feeling that it was an explosive device planted in luggage or somewhere on the plane. The Egyptian leader had said earlier that speculation that the Islamic State might be behind the Russian plane crash was false propaganda aimed at damaging Egypt's image. Now, skipping a bit here, although there has been no official announcement on the results of forensic medical examinations of the crash victims so far, there have been conflicting anonymous reports on the condition of the bodies. The Russian tabloid Life News claims to have obtained the results of a forensic medical examination that allegedly stated that the passengers in the tail section of the liner died because of so-called blast injuries. Burns covered 90% of the victims' bodies, which were pierced by particles of metal and aircraft covering, according to the report cited by the broadcaster. However, TASS news agency cited Egyptian and Russian experts, pardon me, as saying that they had failed to find any blast-related trauma during their preliminary examination of the victims' bodies. There were no signs of an explosion impact found during the preliminary examination, a Russian source said, with another or pardon me, Egyptian expert adding that there were no signs of external impact found on the bodies. Now, that's key because we have already in this developing story a significantly developing split, if this continues, between the West, and you'll notice the source for the idea that there were burn marks on the bodies, shrapnel marks on the bodies, are coming principally from the West, from the United Kingdom and Egypt. And TASS is saying, no, there is no sign of an impact on the bodies. So in other words, is this plane and its terrible downing the result of a bomb on board the plane, or is it the result of an external shoot down? That's where it stands right now. Now, with that in mind, I want you to listen to something very carefully in this RT article. On the day of the crash, the Islamic State ISIS terrorist group claimed responsibility for bringing down the plane. Another Islamic State video released on Tuesday showed a Slavic-looking and Russian-speaking jihadist praising his Sinai brothers in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula for taking down the Russian jet and threatening more attacks in retaliation for Russia's air campaign against ISIS in Syria. The terrorists' claims have been dubbed by Moscow and Cairo as unlikely, with officials saying the terrorist group does not possess the means to shoot down a plane at the altitude at which the Airbus was flying. Okay, unquote. Now, clearly you see where I'm going with this, because what the Russians are implying is, number one, it was shot down, but number two, ISIS can't do it. But now we have to pause and ask ourselves, is that really true? Do we have here a case where the capabilities of these terrorist groups might be being revealed for the first time? Now, the reason I'm asking this question, the reason why I picked this article, and the reason why I'm pointing out that one part of the article for you is to show you that already there's a divergence in the data set, there is a divergence in the story. Whether or not that story is patched back up with an agreement by all parties, Great Britain, Egypt, and of course Russia, remains to be seen. But as it stands now, there is a divergence. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is if you go back in history, there's a very important thing that you must remember. And that is that during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, there was a debate within the American policy community. And I remember this very well because this debate was taking place at the time that I was in the United Kingdom working on my doctorate at Oxford University. And the debate was, should the United States sell Stinger anti-aircraft ground-to-air anti-aircraft missiles to the Mujahideen? Now, obviously, Stinger missiles are not the sophisticated kind of missile that you need to shoot down an aircraft at altitude like an Airbus at cruising altitude from the ground. But it is a step in the right direction. And believe it or not, if I recall correctly, those missiles were sold. So in other words, what I'm trying to bring out to you is it is an assumption to assume that ISIS does not have these things. And the other thing that we must remember is that ISIS, like it or not, is a creation of the West. It is a creation of the national security establishment to bring down Bashar Assad in Syria and institute regime change in a country and bring in a regime that is amenable to the West, preferably a fundamentalist regime to keep the Islamic world backward. All right? Now, I suspect that in that equipping of ISIS in Syria, that rather sophisticated weapons may ultimately have been given to them. And with the terrorist networks in the Middle East, it might be possible, it might be feasible to envision that these weapons somehow made their way to an Egyptian group and brought down the Russian airliner. Now, the purpose here is a bit muddy because ISIS would only be stepping up Russian intervention in the area, and the United States doesn't want this. So, what's going to be very interesting here is to see how this story unfolds. If there is indeed a rift emerging between ISIS and the United States, if this will bring the United States and Russia closer together to wipe out that group, who knows where this is going to lead. The key player here is Russia. How are they going to spin this? How are they going to play all of this information? I suspect that they're going to try to minimize any tensions that it might cause with the United States. But mark my words, if there's any indication that a terrorist group, especially one sponsored by the West, is involved, this is going to give Russia a huge, huge propaganda soft power tool on the world stage. And rest assured, they will use it. Already, I suspect that Russia is going to be calling for a much more determined, much more united front against these terrorist groups, and it will be very, very difficult for the West to resist. The United Kingdom, as you can tell in this story, is going to be a key player in this, depending on which side of the story they're going to come down on. Was this a bomb placed on board, or as the Russian RT article is hinting but not coming right out and saying, was this possibly a takedown from a surface to air missile in a terrorist group's hands? This is a huge story, folks. It's one to watch. I'm not coming down on either side, but I wanted to bring this to your attention because it's going to be, I suspect, a rather busy week at the Nefarium. Anyway, that's it. I will be blogging for those of you who wanted to find out how the conference went. I'll be sharing some of my thoughts pretty soon in a blog article about that. For those of you that I had the pleasure of meeting for the first time at this conference, it was wonderful to meet all of you. It was an excellent conference. Everybody meshed quite well. All the presentations contained information that, in many cases, were new to me. So it was an excellent, excellent conference. And for those of you who did attend who haven't heard the videos, if you bought the streaming tickets, the videos are now up on their website so that you can actually listen to them again or even download them. So anyway, look for that blog on the conference. That's it for this week's news and views from the Nefarium. Bye-bye, and I'll see you all on the flip side, everybody. God bless.